Hi everyone, and welcome to AWS Nordics Office Hours. With me, your regular host, Gunnar Grosch. I am a developer advocate here at AWS. And this is our weekly show coming to you live from the Nordics, where I bring on AWS experts to talk about a specific topic, and then let you, our audience, ask your questions. And hopefully, by the end of every hour, you'll learn something new about AWS. So in this hour, you'll be able to ask your questions, and don't worry if we don't get to your questions straight away. We'll try to cover them where it is appropriate throughout the hour. Like I mentioned, every week I have guests on, and this week I don't only have one guest, I actually have two guests on. So this week I'm joined by Askar and by Pankaj. This time, we're going to talk about continuous delivery for AWS CDK applications with CDK Pipelines. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Hey. Hi.
Hey, Gunnar. Hey, everyone.
So we'll do as we always do, start off with the basic introduction. So Askar, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey, everyone. My name is Askar Serikov, and I'm a solutions architect based in Sweden, in Malmö. So as part of my role, actually, I also specialize on our developer tools. So I'm really happy to talk about CDK today. Thanks for having me.
Pankaj?
Yeah, same as Askar. I'm also a solutions architect, but based out of Oslo, Norway. I'm quite passionate about DevOps in general, and that's why I know a bit about CDK and CDK pipeline that I guess we are about to talk as well. So really excited to be here, Gunnar.
Great to have you both. Yeah, great to have you both on the show. Pankaj, you joined us just a couple of weeks ago as well to talk about AWS Lambda Power Tools. So that episode is available on demand if you want to watch that as well. All right, so we're going to talk about CDK pipelines. And to get there to CDK pipelines, I think we need to start off pretty much from the beginning. So talk about what AWS CDK is. Because we know some of our audience, they are probably CDK experts. Some of you out there, perhaps you haven't started using AWS CDK yet. So to begin with, let's ask a question. Why can't I just set up services through the AWS console?
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, you should not be setting up things on AWS console directly. For that, we have infrastructure as code, as we call it. And AWS Cloud Development Kit, or AWS CDK, as we call it, is one of those tools that help you write infrastructure as code. So coming on to maybe what is infrastructure as code, right? And in its simplest essence, I guess, if you are coming from a development background, it's basically about applying all the practices that you have with application code development to provisioning your infrastructure as well, meaning that you should be maintaining your infrastructure as code, as the name says. You should have version control around it, and you should make your infrastructure repeatable so that you can just deploy it in the same way in other environments as well. So AWS provides different set of toolings that let you build infrastructure as code, and not just AWS. There are a lot of other open source tools as well that lets you do the same. And one of that is AWS CloudFormation, which is sort of, think of it as a backbone of all the other tools that we have around, and AWS CDK is one of that as well. So AWS CDK basically lets you define your infrastructure as code in using one of your familiar programming languages. It could be Java, it could be Python, it could be TypeScript, etc. Right? So the basic idea is that if you are familiar with one of the programming language, you can start to use AWS CDK and build around with that all the infrastructure in AWS, right? So yeah, that's in very short about what infrastructure as code is and what is AWS CDK.
That's great. All right, so I can see people are posting in the chat already. Great to see that. We can see that it works. Keep your comments coming. I see comments about beards so far, which is great. The evolution of beards, I suppose, from mine through Askar and to Pankaj then. So hi, everyone in the chat. Keep your questions and comments coming throughout this hour. All right, so that was quick about why infrastructure as code is good and a basic intro into AWS CDK. So we're going to get to CDK pipelines, but I think it's important to go from the beginning to get there. And I promise you, we're going to see demos, we're going to see code, we're going to see examples of how to use it throughout this hour. All right, so going from there then, what's next then?
Yeah, I guess now since we have introduced AWS CDK, and the next topic should be what's about CDK pipeline and what it's trying to do. So with AWS CDK, there is a concept of construct, as we call it, right? And there are different levels of construct with AWS CDK, and you can think of these levels as level of abstractions, right? So starting from L1 constructs, which are like a one-to-one mapping of AWS CloudFormation resources, right? So if you have a CloudFormation resource, you have a L1 construct with AWS CDK as well to sort of mimic the same behavior. But with CDK, you have these higher level abstractions as well, which we call as L2, L3, or different levels of construct. So with L2 construct, you mean that it's a higher level abstraction, which takes away some of the boilerplate and heavy lifting that you have to do with CloudFormation resources, and it's just very like easy way to get started with those resources. So that's about L2 construct, and then there is a concept of L3 construct or further, which we call as patterns, right? And this can sort of set up a full-blown architecture for you with just few lines of construct code that you have to write in your code base. And one of those construct is again CDK pipeline, that's based on the intention of getting your CDK applications deployed via CI/CDs in a multi-account setup very quickly and easily without you needing to take care of a lot of heavy lifting around building those pipelines. So that's about the CDK pipeline and how it relates to AWS CDK itself.
So yeah, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions around CI/CD pipelines and so on. But first, a question from the chat, or a couple of them at least. So is CDK mandatory for CloudFormation to work?
No, the answer would be that CloudFormation is sort of needed for CDK to work, right? So it's the other way around, wherein CDK is actually using CloudFormation as an underlying sort of service to provision your infrastructure, and it's a higher level abstraction on top of that to write infrastructure in your familiar programming language.
So you're using TypeScript or Python or .NET, for instance, to write your infrastructure as code, which is then outputted as CloudFormation to use.
Yep, that's
right. And then the second question is, let's say that you have infrastructure set up in CloudFormation. Is there a smart way to move to CDK? Can you take your CloudFormation templates and make them CDK?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was in a conversation with one of the customer earlier this week around the similar topic. So there are a few different ways that you can do this. One is something called CFN include construct that we have. It basically lets you include your CloudFormation template and basically start building on top of that CloudFormation template and further define rest of your infrastructure as native CDK application, right? So it's sort of a quick way to get you into CDK application. But then we recommend customers to slowly refactor that as well, and then start using some of the like native CDK constructs as well. But it's generally a good head start for you to just include it and then start building your new infrastructure in native CDK form.
So you wouldn't take your existing CloudFormation templates and just put them through a converter and output CDK?
No, I mean,
No.
I don't know of any such tooling which can do that for you. But it would be nice if there is one that exists.
Sounds like a space for an open source tool. So any builders out there who want to start building that tool, we're open for trying it, definitely. All right. So I said I was going to ask a couple of questions around CI/CD as well. So tell us about CI/CD. Why is that a good practice? We've already covered infrastructure as code. So why do customers use CI/CD and pipelines?
Yeah. I mean, basic concept of CI/CD and DevOps in general is that you should not be touching your infrastructure and deployment process manually. So once you have pushed something to your version control, it should automatically and seamlessly get deployed to your different environments. Obviously, there will be different steps that the deployment process will go through. But the idea is basically to make your deployment process repeatable and without any human intervention. So once you're done merging your pull request, the pipeline should take care of moving your code base end to end. Obviously, it's a journey which customer has to go through in order to make it foolproof. But that's the basic concept around why you should be thinking about having CI/CD pipelines.
And that journey is perhaps a bit easier now with the release of CDK pipelines.
Yep.
Otherwise, before this release, which I think was this summer, is that correct? So before that, you could use CDK with your pipelines, so have deployment of infrastructure as part of your pipelines. But in this case, you're also able to build your pipelines with CDK.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll go through some of the details as well as to why this is easier to set up things for you. So yeah.
All right. So anything else you want to cover around CDK pipelines, or is it time to start looking at how to actually start using it?
I guess we should just move on to the fun bit.
Yeah, I like show and tell. Everyone who's watched the show before knows that when we get past that first 10, 12, 15 minutes, it's time for show and tell to actually start seeing things in action. So I guess it's time for that. And I see there's a question in the chat about sample CDK, samples for CDK as well. And we'll post several links throughout this session, share those with you as well so you can get started easily. All right. Another question. I just need to add that as well. See if you can answer. It depends on if you've used Terraform. So what are advantages of CDK over Terraform? If you have lots of Terraform code, why would you consider CDK?
Yeah. It's always one of those questions where I would say it depends. It's always a matter of choice and preference. I mean, I won't say that if you have your entire infrastructure written in Terraform today, you should go back and rewrite everything after today's show. It's a matter of preference in the sense that if you like working in your familiar programming language and you want to provision your infrastructure that way, CDK is one of that tool that will let you do the same. Terraform, if you have already built a good competency around Terraform, I've used Terraform a lot in my previous jobs, and it's equally a good tool to work with. One thing that always happens, and it's always the case even with CloudFormation, is that once some service is released, right, generally you will get CloudFormation support, and based on that, the L1 construct that I talked about for CDK around the same time. Terraform, which is like an open source tool, generally the community is very active, so you do get support for new services as well, but that there might be a lag sometimes.
Right. All right, that's a good answer, I think. Okay, is it Askar? Are you gonna go out and start showing us examples of CDK and CDK pipeline?
Yes, please.
So let's switch over to your screen share then.
Yeah. So I hope you can see the code fine. So What we're starting with here is basically when you install CDK toolkit on your machine, you create a folder, you go there and you just run CDK init, basically, which will initialize a CDK application there in that folder. This is what you will get. So you will get like a bin file. We will talk about them as well. Some lib file, basically, which will where we will be writing our code and where we will be defining the infrastructure, and all other kind of supporting tools. For this example, I'm using TypeScript because TypeScript is the native language for CDK. So that's why we're going to use that. One other thing that I've done, because we are going to use GitHub repository for our pipeline, I've created an empty repository, cloned it to my folder. So basically now it's kind of is set up as my upstream. And I have, if you're asking like how I'm connecting to it, then I just have a token on my account. And that's what Pipeline is going to use to actually pull the code from GitHub. So basically, that's kind of the prerequisite that we need to clear. And right after, we have our pre-created first stack, which and where we're going to actually define our CDK pipeline. So we start with importing some of the constructs that we will need. So we will need code pipeline.
And this really shows what you mentioned before, Pankaj, that it is the coding language that you are familiar with. In this case, as Askar mentioned, he's using TypeScript. And I think that everyone who's used TypeScript or JavaScript Node recognizes this.
Yeah, that's true. You'll see me showing Java because that's what I like. But TypeScript is equally good language. Not starting the language wars.
And then there are other languages as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we imported some of the libraries and constructs that we will need. From now on, I will actually not be typing everything. I'll be just copying and pasting it if you don't mind, just to save time. So first, and the main construct here that we're going to talk about is the pipeline itself. So we are going to define it here. So const pipeline, we create a new pipeline. We call it CDK Pipeline here. We give it a name. We allow cross-account keys, and that we will need to actually be able to deploy to two different accounts from one pipeline. And this is what you need, which is like a necessary step when you run CDK pipeline, is you need this async step that will basically you specify the input for your code, which in our case is GitHub. This is my personal repository, the branch that we are going to use, and some commands. So that our pipeline is going to run right after it will actually pull this code from our repo. So with that done, basically what we need to do now is switch to our CDK Pipelines demo TS, which is under our bin folder. And this is what you could call a entry point to your app, meaning that whenever you run a CDK application, here you specify which stack you want to run. So in our case, we want to run our CDK pipeline stack, and we need to explicitly state which account that we want to deploy to. And that is, again, necessary if you want to do cross-region, cross-account deployments. So with that saved, first thing that we need to do is actually add it to our Git repository, and that's quite important. If you worked with CDK before, you could assume like, okay, I just need to run CDK deploy now. Not the case now because we're going to pull the code from the repository, right? So before we actually deploy the application, we want to make sure that the code is there. So first of all, you need to run like git add, git commit, and after that git push. I'm not gonna do that now because instead of doing that, I will just show you what will happen right after, just to save our time again. And another important point, actually, when you do CDK pipelines, is you need to add a little line to your CDK JSON file. And that's very important. You will see this in all the instructions that concern CDK pipeline, because it uses a new style of stack synthesis, and it's not enabled by default, I believe. So you will need to add this line there. And you will need to bootstrap your environments, which, Pankaj, I think you can talk a little bit about in depth, right? Why do we need to bootstrap environments? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, do you want me to do it now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So yeah, as Askar was mentioning, that when you are building a CDK application, in general, it's not specific to CDK pipeline. You need to first bootstrap it, right? And what bootstrapping means is that it basically will provision few things which will make it function on behalf of you. And historically, there has been one way of bootstrapping your CDK application, but in order to add these capabilities, which are like cross-account deployment and few other things, there is a new way of bootstrapping CDK application as well. So I can show a few bit quickly around bootstrapping, because it's something I think which I have had conversations with customer as well, to make them understand how to best use bootstrapping and some of the IAM stuff that we mentioned around CDK pipelines. So as Askar was mentioning, this is basically the line that you need to add to your cdk.json. cdk.json is, think of it as a configuration file for your CDK application, right? So you basically tell CDK that it needs to bootstrap based on new way of bootstrapping, and then I'll show what happens when you basically bootstrap, right? So there is a way that you say CDK bootstrap, then it will go and bootstrap your AWS account. Obviously, in this case, it will pick the AWS account that is configured based on my AWS credentials, and under the hood, it will basically go and create a stack called CDK toolkit. And if you will go and dive a bit more into what it actually creates for you, it will create a bunch of IAM roles and permissions which it needs to function on your behalf, right? And if I dive a bit more into what this bootstrapping actually does, so you okay, that's not good. You can basically do something like this, which is, you want to beforehand see what the bootstrapping will do. You can do CDK bootstrap and show template. And this is actually going to show you the CloudFormation template that it's going to run on your behalf, right? And this is what you're seeing is the new template that it will run for you. And if you want to see the difference, you can basically have this environment variable disabled. And once you do that, it will basically pick the old template for you. And if you can see here into the details, it's very like basic stuff that it used to provision before. It was an S3 bucket where it needs to store your asset, etc. But if I now switch to the new way of synthesizing things, right? And then I do bootstrap show template, you'll see that there are a bunch of other IAM policies that it will create for you, right? And these are needed for CDK to act on your behalf, to actually go ahead and deploy things, say cross account, right? So it makes those things really easy for you. And how you do that is basically trusting the account that you want to deploy to, right? So one of those command will look something like, let me see, something like this. And if you look at this closely, right, this is basically saying CDK that you need to bootstrap this particular account, which is over here, and it needs to trust the account ending with 321, and you also define something called cloud formation execution policy, and this is a policy which CDK will use when it's going to deploy to this particular account which is ending with 456, right? So if you set up a CDK pipeline, you are, say, doing a cross account deployment. This is the policy that CDK will use to deploy to that account, right? And you might be wondering at this point that, is this a good practice to give administrator access to a particular account to basically do anything inside another account? And the short answer is no. And that's why I wanted to bring up this topic, because I've had few customers asking about this. And there are few best practices that we actually recommend in our documentation. So this is our CDK pipeline construct documentation page. It is obviously having a lot of details, but there is a section which also talks about CDK bootstrapping, right? And it documents all the stuff that I just told about, like the new synthesis and all. But if you go further down, there is a section around best practices, right? And it's highlighted in yellow and all those things. But the short sort of summary is that basically you should not be using administrator access when trusting other accounts, right? So administrator access is something that you should use just once when you are bootstrapping the account where the CDK pipeline is going to be existing. But all the other trust that you will establish with the CDK pipeline and the trusted account, that should not have idly administrative access. You should basically configure a policy that will basically support all the needs that you have from your CDK application. So that would be the one way to go. And then other thing that we recommend is actually configuring permission boundaries, right? So if I go back here, where I was showing you show template part, you'll see that this is the role which will be used by CDK to deploy stuff, right? And there is a way wherein you can point CDK to say that please don't use this particular CloudFormation template, but use what I am telling you to use, right? And we even link basically a sample template here, where we actually give you an example as to how you can create a permission boundary, right? So if you see here, we are defining basically our own bootstrapping template, but it's having all the same things which are expected by CDK pipeline. But in addition, we are defining a permission boundary, and it's a good way for you to basically prevent developers or any other audience to quickly escalate their permissions inside like your CDK pipeline itself and do whatever they want to do. So permission boundary could like prevent actions like creating a new IAM role on their behalf, right? So this is just one example. So these are some of the best practices that you should be thinking about when you are actually going to use CDK pipeline in production setup, right? You should not be blindly just following the first part of the documentation, because documentation is talking about to quickly get you up and running. But there is a section which documents this best practice that I just told about in a good way as well. So do look at it if you are going to use this in a production like setup.
And I pasted the link in the chat. And this bootstrapping, it needs to be done on each account that you would deploy to. Is that correct?
Yes. So that's a one-time setup that you need to do, and then rest of the things will be taken care by CDK pipeline on your behalf. So you don't need to, traditionally how you would do is assume role and do all those stuff. CDK pipeline will do that on your behalf.
So there's a comment in the chat that I suppose at some point the new style will be the only style.
At some point, yes. I think it's even documented in one of our doc page, CDK Bootstrap. I think I can find that and paste that here. But at some point, yes. Right now, it's still like the legacy bootstrapping is still the default. but at some point it will definitely replace. And there are certain advantages to the new bootstrapping as well. Like one of that is it's versioned. So you can actually say that pick this particular version of bootstrapping as well, if for some reason you are incompatible with the new version, right?
You heard it here first, people. Legacy CDK. That's interesting. All right.
Legacy CDK bootstrapping. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Great, Pankaj. Thanks for that explanation. Back to Askar's demo then. But first, if you just joined us, this is the AWS Nordics Office Hours with me, Gunnar Grosch. I'm joined by Pankaj and Askar. We're talking about AWS CDK pipelines today. Keep your questions and comments coming in the chat, of course.
Thanks, Pankaj. Yeah, that's a very important point about bootstrapping, because if you use CDK before and you will try it just right away, it will not work. So please make sure that you bootstrap your environment with this new process, and that's will take care of things. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here because it's a video, because I want to save our time and make sure that nothing breaks in production. So I will just show you what's actually happening. So what we added this code, and then CDK asks us if, like, it shows us all the new security-related resources that it wants to create first. And it asks us, okay, do you want to actually deploy these changes? We say yes. And then it's deploying our pipeline stack. All the resources we can see here. Takes some time. And then if we switch to the actual console, we will see under code pipeline, we will see this new pipeline that we call CDK Pipeline. So we can see already that it hooked up the source. So it picked up the code from GitHub. It passed the build stage. And it's now updating the pipeline, but it's not really going to update anything because we haven't added any steps to our pipeline, right? We just created the pipeline itself. So
let's just pause there for a second. I think this is important to note as well, that it's not a new service. We're not introducing something new, a new CDK pipeline service. We're using the same services that people are familiar with. We're using code pipeline, it's using code build, and so on. So it is, once again, using CDK for setting things up and using these pipeline CI/CD tools that you're familiar with.
Yeah, and hopefully by the end of the session, you will see how many things it takes care of for you. So let's take a look at that. So actually, from this point forward, we will not need to do any CDK commands anymore, because we deployed the stack. From now on, all the updates that we're going to make, we will just push to our repository. That means that if you work with, like, if you have a team of developers, they don't need to have AWS credentials anymore at this point. If you've set up this pipeline, they can just push code to your repository, to a specific branch that is configured here. And that's it. It will actually pick up this update automatically, build it, and deploy it. That's pretty cool.
Very cool.
So after we have our pipeline set up, what we actually need to do now is create the actual stacks, right? The actual stacks that will hold our resources. So what I'm going to do is take a like base stack, application stack approach, which is very common. When you create one stack that holds so-called shared resources. So in my case, what I'm going to deploy is a web application that is running inside a container, and we're running it on Fargate ECS, so Elastic Container Service. And so as a shared resources, we will have VPC. So basically, we can have the same VPC, but we can have a lot of containers that we run there and applications. And we will create a cluster, ECS cluster, that as well can hold a lot of different applications. So this is what we call the base stack that holds our shared resources. So nothing really interesting here. So actually, you can see here how simple it is to create resources with a CDK. you can see just 3 lines, basically 2 lines of code, and that's VPC created. We just pass its name. We specify how many availability zones we want for that VPC, and that's it. And we create a cluster for ECS as well. Just the cluster itself, we supply it a VPC because it needs that, and that's it. And actually, you can see here that we are going to kind of export it, make it available for the other stack that we're going to create, right? Because this ECS cluster will be used by application stack that we're going to create now as well. Just give me a second. I hope you don't mind me copy pasting stuff, but just again, it's a lot of typing, yeah, a lot of, especially here. So here we have more stuff going on because this stack is actually going to define the containers themselves. You can see here that we are importing basically the cluster. We use the cluster that we pass from the base stack. We define the Fargate task definition, where we just basically say, okay, we want this much memory and this much CPU for our tasks. Then one interesting thing here and that we're doing is the Docker image asset. So the actual application code is going to be here as well in the CDK pipeline code. Let me just copy this stuff from here. So what we're going to do, we are going to paste, we're going to paste this src folder here that holds our Flask application and the Docker file. So that means that our CDK pipeline not will just deploy the resources, it will actually build the application itself. So we're just telling it where to find our the Docker file. We define the container itself. We're supplying the image, the task definition that we already created. And the interesting thing here is we pass environmental variables here to our containers. What we're going to pass is just some strings, but in the production environment, you can basically pass this way, the same way you can pass maybe configuration parameters or something like that. That's pretty useful. We do some port mappings just to make sure that it is reachable. We create security groups, of course, that we will attach to our cluster, the service. Here, we are creating the application load balancer because we want to put it in front of our actual ECS cluster and interact through the load balancer with our cluster. So yeah, that's it basically. So we have base stack that have just a couple of resources that are shared, and then we have application stack where we have most of the application-related resources defined. So now, one last step, which is kind of specific to CDK pipeline, is that if you used CDK before, you can just already go and just deploy these 2 stacks, and it will work. But since we want to make them just as a part of our CDK pipeline, we want to group them into what we call a stage. And the stage, as you can guess from the name, is basically like just one step in the pipeline. So we're saying, okay, add this stage to add this step to the pipeline, and inside of that step, we're basically just adding these stacks, okay? And we are just using some, we're outputting some values as well. And we also here specify that, okay, we want to pass some of variables from the pipeline to our application here. Okay, so since we have our stage now, all we need to do is add this stage to our pipeline. So we need to import it first. And after that, we need to create a stage here, just define it. So this will be our stage. we specify which account and which environment to deploy it to. So it's account number, region, and our variables that we want to pass there. Last step, make sure that you add this stage to your pipeline with a simple command, pipeline add stage. So this way, if we deploy this, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit here again and show you the video of what's gonna happen, because yeah, it's gonna take some time. Interesting part here is that as like so far you see on the screen, it's the same, right? The pipeline looks the same stages and all that. Then actually it's updating itself at this point. And when it does that, you can see that it automatically adds all the stages that are needed for our in our pipeline. So it adds now the asset step where the code build will actually build our Docker image, and then the application stage itself, where we actually deploy our stacks, and you can see them here. Base stack, it prepares it, then deploys, and then the app stack. The order in which it deploys the stacks, it knows because we have some dependencies there, right? We pass the VPC or the cluster from base stack to the application stack. That's how it knows which order to use when deploying those. So when that is ready, so it will take some time again to actually deploy. Here you can see step by step. Let me just find the step where I just go to my console, grabbing the load balancer's DNS name and testing if it works. And it does. If you take a closer look, so we have a red background, we have a greeting that says hi from my main account. Those we pass here, actually. So you can see here that we pass this and we pass the background color. So now, another really cool stuff that you can do with code with CDK Pipeline is you can just add another stage. And it will use the stacks that we already created before, right? The only difference being that we're just changing which environment that we want to deploy to. So we just use the different account, as you can see. We still use the same region. We pass a different variables here. So, and here also what we need to do is just go add stage, and we add our alt stage, which stands for alternative stage. Save it, deploy it. What you will see there is this, basically. So you will see that it does the same things as usual. It picks up the new code, updates the pipeline, and we can see here that it's deploying it to the app stage first, the same as in the last deployment. And after that, take a look here, it actually deploys it to app stage out, which is an alternative stack, alternative environment. Sorry. So basically, with just a couple of lines of code, we deployed the same stack with actually different variables, right? We passed it a different environmental of variables there. And we just like that deployed it to another account. And here I am just finding the DNS address again, just to check that it works fine. And it's loading. It does indeed. So from the same application code, we see that the background is different now, the greeting is different now, but we basically deployed it to another region, to another account. And it was possible because, as Pankaj said, it's very important that you bootstrap your accounts in advance. So that second account that we're deploying to also needs to be bootstrapped, and it needs to trust the main account where our pipeline is located.
Right. So
yes.
Just a couple of questions from the chat based on what you just showed. There's a question around using a different Docker image, because in your example now you're building an image, and well, I guess that's stored in ECR, and you're using that image. But you could basically, for your ECS tasks, you could use any Docker image.
Yes,
either
absolutely.
a public image or a private one if you have permissions to it.
Yeah. So as far as I know, at least for Docker help, there is a construct that accepts even your credentials. So yeah, definitely you can pull images from Docker Hub, for example, from ECR for sure. If you upload it as part of some other pipeline, you can do that. Yes, it's just in this example I want to show that it's possible to bundle your application code with your CDK pipeline code.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps is tied together with this question: if you can deploy Node.js apps, and I think you just answered that. You can bundle any type of app you wish. You've set up the infrastructure in this case using ECS, and you used it was a Flask application, I think.
Yeah.
But you could basically use any type of application for it.
Definitely, of course, you can use whatever you want. Like as long as it can run inside the container, it's fine.
Cool. Then we have a question that's very specific, perhaps for a specific use case. Let's just see if you recognize that. Stuck in an error, both source and artifacts must be set to code pipeline. I want to use an artifact name defined in the build spec.
Yeah.
Seems to be okay in the CloudFormation template.
Yeah. I think what it's referring to is that because with CDK pipeline, it's an opinionated construct, right? So it assumes a lot of things on your behalf, and one of that is that it sort of generates an artifact bucket for you. So if your code build project already has a build spec defined, I guess you can still do that via something called partial build spec. Let me see if I can show that for you. It's something called this thing, right? So this is again an example in, I don't know if you're showing my screen, but this is again an example in Java, creating a code pipeline or CDK pipeline. But basically you can point it to a build spec file still, but the artifact bucket that is there is something which CDK controls for you. So you still need to output the directory using primary output directory construct, even though you are using a build spec file to sort of define your code build project. So yeah, based on the question, I think that's what it was intended for, but I might have misunderstood it as well.
Otherwise, I know Pankaj is eager to dive deeper into that question. You can reach him on Twitter. You see his Twitter handle next to him. So feel free to DM Pankaj there as well.
One more thing I think which I wanted to touch upon, because the question arose around is that using again images from different account, right? This can be a different account as compared to where you want to ever deploy resources, right? So you don't need to trust that account in the same way as you would do an account where you need to deploy resources, right? So there is a different option that you can use for such accounts, which is trust for lookup, right? So you can segregate these two responsibilities, saying that, okay, my CDK pipeline, you need to trust this X account just for lookup purpose, right? And you can sort of cut down your IAM policies based on those requirements compared to what you would have trust for something where CDK pipeline will deploy something for you.
All right, that's great. So Askar, was there anything left to show?
Yes, actually, I just want to show a couple of more things. So if you've noticed before, what we saw is that CDK pipeline we created two different stages, right? So it would actually deploy first to the main account and the second to the alternative account. And you might ask, ask like why, because they are not really dependent on each other. Wouldn't it be faster if I could just deploy 2 stacks at the same time? And you can do that. And I just wanted to show what you need to do for that. So there is a construct called Wave as part of CDK pipeline. And basically, Wave is a stage in itself. But what you can do is you can add your stages to that wave. And the stages that you add to your wave are actually going to be deployed in parallel. And that's actually pretty interesting as well, because just last week I had a conversation with a customer. They wanted to deploy 10 stacks at the same time, and they couldn't find a way of doing that, like straightforward way of doing that. So for them, actually, what seems to be very nice as solution in this case could be something like that. Just create a wave, create a pipeline, create a wave, add all these 10 stages that you want to deploy in parallel, and that will work fine. So if we save it now, and again, just show you the video, what's going to happen when you do that. So when you add that, you will see that the pipeline now looks like this. Basically, the wave action, now you can see that both of them are deployed in parallel. And actually, so you see that they have like the same sort of steps, right? Until this first step will not complete in both of them, they will not proceed to the second one, and so on. That's important to keep in mind. But that's, again, it's a good solution. Like if you want to test something and you want to test them in different accounts, it doesn't make sense to wait until like first account and the other. You just push them at the same time and they will work. And actually, I mean, at the end, I guess I will show there that I can, no, I'm not showing it, but like the containers themselves are still running and they work fine. And just one more thing until, just give me a minute. So for those of you who were looking closely, you remember that we were outputting the load balancer's address, and you could wonder, why did we do that? Well, as part of the test, like just to test that our deployment worked fine, we can add another step that will run after our wave. And this step will basically take our load balancer's DNS addresses, right? And we will run certain command that basically will do curl, and it will see if the status code, if it's not 200, then it will exit with 1. Basically, it will throw an error at you, and you will see it because the pipeline basically will fail in that case. Yeah, and that's kind of one way of doing some sort of like integration test, something that you can automate. And if I just show you how my current pipeline it looks like now. Hope you can see it. So everything is the same. I have my test here, and then I'm not gonna show it in code, but what you can do, you can also add manual approval step. So after you deploy and you see that your test is fine, you probably will still want to check manually, maybe, or run some tests before you approve the switch to production.
Yeah.
So here you can have the manual step where you will actually need to click approve. And after that, we will have another stage, which I called prod stage, and then it will actually deploy your application there. So that is it. That is everything I wanted to show you. I hope we covered some basics that helps you move faster with CDK pipeline.
Very cool. And I think if any of the viewers have ever set up a complete pipeline using CloudFormation, I think it's very obvious that this is a whole lot easier. It is a lot of things involved to get that up and running, and just making changes to it is quite complex as well. So using CDK pipeline seems to be a whole lot easier. There's a pretty long question in the chat. Let me bring that up. There we go. if there's a new version of CDK, should you remove the existing CDK toolkit and rebootstrap? For instance, if there is an update to CDK, do you need to rebootstrap, or is that not needed unless you now are going to use CDK pipelines and need to use not the legacy, the new one?
Yeah, I don't think you need to recreate it every time if you are already using the modern or the new way of bootstrapping. But there is obviously a migration path. I think it's actually documented in the same CDK pipeline construct documentation page as to if you have been using the old way of bootstrapping and now you want to use capabilities in CDK which requires you to have new bootstrapping, then there is a migration path as to how you can do and what things you should be careful about, because there is things around role renaming. If that happens, then your existing pipelines might start to fail. So it's I think very clearly documented in troubleshooting issues section of the CDK construct or CDK pipeline construct.
So would that mean that you don't have to do it? You probably don't have to do it, but if things fail, you should do it?
Yeah.
Is that the answer?
Not really. I guess what I was trying to say is that in ideal scenario, you should not be required to do that. If you are moving from old way to new way, or you require some features that requires you to have new bootstrapping, then you have to obviously migrate away from the old way of bootstrapping, and there is a migration sort of checklist as to how you should do that in the same CDK pipeline documentation.
And I can say that I had to do that myself, because I had one environment where I bootstrapped a while ago and haven't used that, and then I wanted to deploy, and I had to do the same. So yes, I think if Pankaj says that it's in the documentation is good, but yeah, I think when you kind of have this major update, you better update it manually, basically.
I think there is also a question regarding, can you add a stage with a custom code build project? And the answer to that is yes, you can do that. So I guess when you were seeing Askar's code, we were using shell step as the default step. And then it obviously is, again, a higher level abstraction on top of code build project. But if Gunnar, you show my screen, there is a code build step as well that lets you have more control over some of the configurations and basically have everything under your control for setting up a code build project. So yeah, you can definitely do that.
All right, cool. So this hour just flew by. I know we had a lot more things we could have shown, but we are actually approaching top of the hour. Pankaj, I know you wanted to show. You have about a minute to talk about it, and we'll share the link.
Maybe this will be helpful for people who are trying to sort of get head around how is it different, right? So this is an open source project which is available on AWS Samples. It tries to sort of use different things, not with an intention that you cannot do one thing with one tool or other thing with another tool. It's basically trying to showcase different possibilities. So basically, this repo tries to set up this static website with CloudFront S3 static website distribution with CDK, right? And I wanted to actually dive a bit into it, but basically, if you'll go to front-end infrastructure folder of this, it's obviously written in Java, but there is a pipeline package inside it, and it holds front-end pipeline stack, which sort of gives you an idea of what it would take if you have to do this via native code pipeline CDK constructs, right? So basically, you still deal with a lot of the specifics of code build, code pipeline, and you have to sort of take care of stitching things together. While at the same time, if you go to this other construct, as we call it, it basically tries to set up the same thing for you, but using CDK pipeline, right? And you can, that was my intention to actually compare these two today and show that how much easier it becomes if you are sort of using CDK pipeline. Other thing that I wanted to show quickly for those who might not be familiar.
I don't think we have the time, to be honest, Pankaj. Sorry about that.
Yeah. But this is a URL that you can share. It's a CDK workshop. So for those of you who want to get like a hands-on experience, this is a public workshop that you can use. And it also has CDK pipeline as one of the topic.
All right, that's great. Where is that workshop? It is there. Okay, everyone, with that, thanks everyone for watching. Let me see if I'm able to share it. Here we go. Thanks everyone for watching. This has been another edition of AWS Nordics Office Hour. Thanks Pankaj and thanks Askar for being with us today. And I hope everyone enjoyed this session on CDK pipelines. Thank you very much and see you again next Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.